Okay, looks like we are live today. Welcome back to MissionTop. MissionTop is a place, it's a farmstead and ranch. It is a family, our family, but it's also a place of ideas. And, I thought as I begin each show, kind of giving this description of MissionTop, I've tried to decide if I had to just give one description of what it would be. To me, it would be a place of philia sophia. The basically the word philosophy, but not in the kind of modern way that we think about philosophy, but in the ancient way, which is a love of wisdom. I think this is a place where we pursue this kind of relationship, a friendship love with wisdom. And again, it's a pursuit, not any claims of an end goal. But today I am here with my wife, Sara, and this is her third time joining me. I'm excited to have her back. Because I think it's at this point by popular demand, as many people like.
I'm pretty sure.
Like having her on. It's a refreshing difference from me whenever I'm on, it's more about the ideas and trying to articulate thoughts and, complex ideas and things like that, where, as you kind of need a break from that sometimes, myself included. So to have Sara on here brings things a little bit more back to earth, if you will, and to reality. And so today it's all going to be about, once again, getting her take, her opinion on what creating this pursuit of a life, because it's not like a fully furnished or finished life, but what this pursuit of a life has been like from her perspective. And the first time she was on, we got through a lot of our story up to the point, I think, where we
got distracted last time.
Yeah.
We got all over the place.
These things always take longer than you think they will.
I'd like to go back to that story too, by the way. I still like our story of getting married and stuff.
Yeah, that's a story in and of itself that, if told in the right way, could be interesting. Because again, with all these kinds of stories, the assumption is that they're in some way actually worth sharing with others, and that's a presumption. And so, as far as our story of how we met and kind of our romance, everybody kind of presumes that their story's good when actually maybe it's not. And so we don't want to presume too much. But yeah, I think ours, if presented in the right light of not just like look, this is such a good story, but rather maybe there's some good principles here that can be of use to each other, then it would be interesting to others. So I think if we did it right, it would be worth doing. Maybe.
At least for like posterity's sake is all I can really think of.
And at the end of the day, even this type of stream, if for nothing else, is good for posterity. And so we're happy to do it in any case. But where we left off last time, I think, was more how we'd met, our story kind of from the point of building this life of a pursuit of or was it kind of creating a mini retirement kind of life, and what we did with that in our travels. So I'm going to pick up, and if it's a little bit of a recap, that's okay.
Yeah.
But we're going to kind of start as we decided to use a bit of that freedom we'd created to travel for a year as a family, and take, all the 8 children. Again, we had a 2-month-old when we started on this year. I kind of gave it a special dynamic and special challenges, but in the end, positive challenges in the end. So we're going to pick up on that kind of as we were wrapping that part of our life up. And I'm going to lead by asking Sara, what places in the countryside during our travels did we live in? And what did she learn? What did you learn from each of these places in the countryside? Because that will kind of lead nicely into what followed from there.
Okay. I mean, I'm always afraid to come off a little bit shallow, but so much of my life is around gathering supplies and groceries and doctor's visits and things like that for the kids. That's always a huge thing that I'm afraid of, being around civilization, that we're going to be so far away that it's going to be such a pain to get that ingredient, or I'm not going to ever be able to plan ahead well enough to make a meal happen, or, make it if there's an emergency and have to rush a kid to the hospital or anything like that. But places on our trip that kind of taught me that was totally doable. I mean, it wasn't easy at first. We were in Spain we were too close to a grocery store. I'm having to jog my memory just a little bit. But as I think it was definitely when we made it up to Scotland that I finally started to realize, oh, if we plan ahead and if everyone's kind of on board and we go kind of into town with this mentality of we're going to divide and conquer and make things happen so that we can get everything we need to get done in a reasonable amount of time and then get back to our house. It's not impossible. It's not as hard as I think it's going to be, because I thought it'd be really hard to be away from Costco and to be away from, Days Market was a local market that we'd always go to that was just like, I could send the kids there a 5-minute bike ride practically. So is that kind of what you're looking for?
And that's in our regular Utah life.
Yeah.
Yes. Although like probably the first place that was really truly countryside, because we lived in some, never in big urban environments at first. Again, in Spain, then we went to South Wales. It was a kind of place a little tucked away from a city, but fairly close to a city, more like not exactly a suburb, but just outside of a city. But it was really when we went to the Lake District in England that we've really kind of were living on a farm. And so, what I'd like to know is, especially starting with that type of environment, and we had a few more like that.
Yeah.
What did you learn from that?
Okay, that makes sense. What you're trying
to get
more like,
and how, in ways that later came to influence us actually deciding to do something like that.
So, I mean, it was the excitement living in the Lake District, because you realize that we could have all these other projects going on, because that's where we were on the lambing farm, right in the middle of the height of the lambing season. And everyone was excited to run down and help the farmer and be involved with everything that was going on there. And it made them so fulfilled and so happy. And especially on our trip, as we'd been just with our family, they were so excited to have something else going on. But that definitely translated to here as well, because I knew that being away, leaving our home that we were used to and coming up here away from family and friends, I knew that being around animals and having that kind of growth and life and farm lifestyle would be doable, because we had already done that and saw that it was a very rewarding experience for everybody.
Yeah, what did you like seeing and how the kids were with there, and also interacting with the shepherd and his wife and his parents, who I think we did bring them up before. James and Holly.
And we still keep in close
what
touch
did you
with
like
them.
about looking at their kind of style of life and our kids as compared to what they would be doing if they were just living in a regular urban environment?
Well, maybe this sounds funny, but they were just so normal. Maybe I had thought for a long time that if you're going to do something like farming or something more rural, that you automatically were just a little bit of a different person. That's a very stupid city girl mentality, I know, but they were totally normal, totally up with things. And I don't know, that kind of just made it easy for them to be with them.
Well, that's worth remarking, that there's still that predominant notion in culture generally, and kind of Western culture generally, that's been there for some time now, that people, if you have capability, you leave farms, right? If you have smarts, you leave farms, and that's been kind of the story of ever since at least our grandparents, that all of society is told. So there is still that notion out there that you're kind of trained into, that comes from culture, that back in the farm is for the people that are a little less capable, and so
And
I think we're just
the
trying to
opposite was
is,
just totally true there.
Yeah.
Like the farmer's wife was just preparing to be an official doctor there, and she was still totally coming down. I mean, they made farming look cool in a way, and it was exciting. And the kids, I mean, they just couldn't wait to get up, talk and help and see what was going on that day, what adventures had happened through the night. I mean, all of that stuff really influenced us as a family, helping us realize this was something that we were excited about and that we wanted to do and we could do.
Mm-hmm. So. Okay, great. So that was, the Lake District. From there, we went to a place that we weren't exactly on a farm. We were also at least in a small town environment, small kind of village environment in the Scottish Highlands. And anything worth remarking there, just kind of that small kind of village life that you liked or disliked? I mean, what did you learn there?
Oh, no. The only thing we didn't like about living there was that we lived like right in front of the highway because it really inhibited us. But that was the coolest place, because our house...
That's good to learn, because now we don't.
Yeah, exactly. But if you could get over that highway, you could get on the coolest little foresty paths to get over to the quaint little village that we lived near. And then there you could get, whatever you needed. And it was kind of an adventure and fun to go into town that way. But
how about the people that you met that were, part of that environment? Even our next door neighbor or some friends that we met, the Simpsons.
We met some great friends there, the Simpsons, who we still keep in touch with and really cherish our friendship with them. But I mean, I don't know how to describe a lot of people. Like the lady lived next door to us, she seemed annoyed with us at first, but then brought us 2 boxes of toys to use for our stay there. People in Scotland would generally kind of come off a little bit harsh from what I was used to, but had hearts of gold for sure. So, and whenever we'd go into town, I always had a little, flock of children with me, and that always drew attention and questions. But people at first would maybe seem a little bit harsh or gruff, but no, they weren't. They were always helpful, would start to share their own stories, things like that. And, connections were made easy that way.
I think something that I'll add in that I'm pretty sure Sara would agree with is just how in all these small environments, you saw how everybody knew each other.
Yeah.
Like across Western culture, we still have this thing. There has been decimation of communities of all sorts, especially in urban environments where it's very easy to not know, persons 2 doors down from where you live and whatnot. And that's occurred everywhere, even in these small places. But if there's any place where there's more of a possibility that you'll know everyone, and still have a sense of community, it would be these smaller places. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. And like when I went and got my haircut when we were in that town, we're sitting down there and everybody that's walking in and out of the hair salon knows each other, has stories to tell. Maybe they're even just dropping by to say hi, not even coming in for anything like any service. But yeah, it was a cool thing, but it also made me realize how much I really wanted that feeling, because I hated feeling like an outsider, like someone that was just kind of coming into an area and just taking what I wanted from it, but I wasn't contributing to it. That was a hard thing about our travels.
Yeah, that is hard to get into these places where everyone knows each other and you're the
I'm like
the outsider.
leeching off of everybody's goodness and goodwill, and especially in small towns like that aren't exactly set up for tourism. Like they welcome it, but not, it's not like they're set up to help anybody figure out things that normally like family or friends would fill the place of. So
okay. So we ended up, being in a few other places during that year that were kind of in this countryside environment. We ended up back in Scotland because we loved it so much. And we stayed at kind of this manor, this estate, and I'll kind of jump over that one.
No, it was a castle.
Yeah, it was like a castle kind of thing.
You can jump over it, but just leave it at that.
And the thing I think we learned from that one was too isolated.
Yeah, that was too far away from everything.
Yeah, and it took us 20 minutes just to get into town, and there were like almost no neighbors.
Yeah, it was just a very weird feeling for everyone and the kids.
Yeah, it was a little bit spooky at night when everything's all dark and
it wasn't a little bit, it was a lot.
You didn't know there was anybody around you or what lurked in that darkness or whatnot. So
yep. So a memorable experience at least.
But then we went to Cornwall, England.
Yes.
Once again, we were on somewhat of a working farm. And anything to add from there?
It was really fun to go back to a working farm after we'd had been away for a while, because it just reaffirmed how much we loved being around life and kind of being around other people that appreciate farming and land and kind of have a good understanding of it. So
yeah, and so bringing that all together, like my sense is that if it hadn't have been for all those experiences in that year of travel, we probably would not be doing what we are today. So I wanted to see if maybe kind of what's your overall summary of what it was about being in those places that ultimately you think might have led us to doing what we're doing now.
Well, yeah, because we always had really good contrast. I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're looking for, but it...
I'm just looking for what you think.
Well, what I think is that every time we did... There's something about traveling that for some reason walking into Paris or Madrid, or even when we stayed in Granada in Spain and Barcelona, those places were so exciting because there was just stuff going on all the time. People were out all night, driving their scooters. It was just like this, the kind of being in the chaos of all of that was really cool. I don't know what it is that attracted me to that. I liked that. But by the end of our trip, it was amazing how much we were like, no, we don't want to have to go through London. Oh, can we maybe stay in a smaller place in Paris? on this, maybe not in Paris, maybe just somewhere else in France. Like we just started to avoid it because it was just hard to feel comfortable. Not only just because we had a lot of kids to keep looking at, to look after, but it was just hard to feel comfortable because those places you realize are so, that's all they are. They are just chaos. And it's hard to really get to know anybody or make a connection with someone that's meaningful or lasting. You might have a thing like, oh yeah, we're from the United States. And they're like, oh, cool. But that's it. Where in these smaller towns and these other places that we're able to be, people generally cared a lot more because they were home. They were where they were used to, and they could welcome us in easier because they were set and, more established and had more of a foundation.
Yeah, they were definitely quieter, more tranquil, and I'll add in, there was always, nature was always much more in connection with you in any of these places.
Yeah. It seemed like all those places, everyone had such an appreciation for the nature that they lived in as well.
Yeah, especially if they were actually involved in it with their own animals and whatnot, which not only connects you to kind of the domestic side of nature, but then it also by the fact that you're now connected into there, you also are much more aware of the more wild side of nature, because that's always a bit of a threat oftentimes, or it can help in your kind of domestic side of nature. So I think it brings both of those in. But yeah, eventually we made it home. We ended in Jerusalem, which was an experience in and of itself.
Oh yeah.
But as we got home at the end of that year, so this is the end of 2019. COVID had not begun yet. We're here in Christmas, the New Year, so now we're into 2020, a couple months before COVID really got it going, I guess you could say. So what were we looking for at that point? What was
I was
our
kind
mindset?
of almost dreading coming back because I knew that you still hadn't exactly, like when we went on our trip, you were going to make videos of our experience all along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of surrendered that goal
to just
be like, let's
it.
experience this and live it. I mean, it was harder in different ways than we had anticipated. Mm-hmm. But so I knew that coming home meant a day of reckoning a bit, where you were going to have to figure out what you were doing. And then my goal was we kind of put off buying a more permanent home for our family to go on this trip. Like that had kind of been something we'd been looking for. And so I was like, oh, I want to come back and get into a place that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, we definitely outgrown our home, and we knew we needed to do something else. But yeah, we'd kind of been changed from this whole experience, and so it was a question out there of,
like, a lot of the homes
now?
that I would have been looking at before we went on our trip, I would never think about being in after, just because my priorities were different. I didn't just want a big house. I wanted kind of a cool house. I wanted something that could fit lots of different of our family's interests.
Maybe cool, maybe beautiful.
Beautiful.
Let's say, like a lastingly beautiful.
I got to use the vocabulary that this channel requires. So.
But yeah. I mean, one thing in that is that to add is that when you do something like decide you're going to go on a journey, whatnot, this is a little bit of the Bilbo Baggins kind of thing. Like, we all know now, especially because of the stories, that you will not return the same people, the same person. That is the nature of any sort of lasting journey, is that it will change you, fundamentally, such that you come back and the world is no longer the same. The places, the thing, if for us, like looking for a place to live, the places we used to think as acceptable or desirable had changed. They no longer were. The world around us had changed. So that's something that's kind of cool about a journey, is there's a sense of fundamental transformation found within a journey, and that's probably the reasons why they're taken. But of course, it's always a fraught thing, because who knows how you're going to change, for good or bad.
Yeah, and that's something that I ask myself all the time.
Yep. Okay, so we had a little bit of a question mark of what actually we wanted, and then and so we're kind of laying low for a couple months, just getting back into the regular routine of things, and there we're kind of bringing into March, I believe it was, when when COVID hit, and that's where the world kind of changed, our world and lots of people's world. So maybe you could pick up there and from your perspective say what is it that about COVID coming in and the changes that kind of there, how did that change your outlook on what we wanted at that point, if at all?
I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, and you've talked about how during that time you were feeling a little bit bored.
Yeah.
And that was different because I wasn't feeling that way at all. Because I was like now given even more to do than I had to do before, helping the kids all be homeschooled and still feel a bit fulfilled because I was really concerned. We had kept our kids out longer than we had promised initially. And then coming back home, I had promised them to help them get back with their friends, get back into things, get back into life. I mean, there was no chance of doing a lot of the sports they'd wanted to do because we weren't there around for the tryout times. And you know how you kind of miss your opportunities. We'd missed a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, so there was a lot of effort to get them back into regular life. And
yeah,
then,
life was, we did not come back and lay low.
And then, okay, but then regular life stopped, right, because of COVID. So then what? But
so then as we were going, like my worries were, oh no, like we're kind of going back into our trip mode, which was so wonderful because I love just having our own family and really working out things in our own family for good and bad, you know, just all those kinds of things and having that unified time. But I was so worried for our kids because I'm like, oh, we kind of like promised when we come back and get them back into normal life. And now the world is just kind of stopping. And I knew that was going to be hard on them. And then through this all, Gary is feeling a little bit bored and unsettled. And we truly were having a hard time knowing where we wanted to be. And we knew that was a priority no matter what, this COVID or not. So...
Yeah, and I guess I should put in, like, I've said more in detail on other things, kind of what was going through my mind as I watched what was going on in the world, and feeling very, very much exposed where we were kind of in a more urban environment by COVID, as far as just, you know, what can ultimately happen very easily with society in general today, the way it's been set up in such a efficient but fragile manner where so many systems are interconnected, and any of them going down, you know, the whole thing can go down. And so anyway, I've gone into more detail on that later. I want to focus on Sarah, but that's why I at least started thinking, you know, let's broaden our search to places, because at that point we had mainly still been thinking like around where we lived, maybe have a little more land, maybe have an animal or something, you know, 2 sheep or something, a milking cow or something like that. But this really got me thinking, maybe we should think about this broader in order to, you know, to have a more country life like we'd already been thinking. But
well, and that wasn't just you either, because we realized after being more away and then going away from a place for a year and then coming back in our particular area had really changed. You know, everything was getting built out to the corners of the land, you know, big houses put on small lots, not as much potential for us to find a place. And also not knowing if, like, one thing I found frustrating when we moved back was that I felt like I was always stuck in traffic. And for some reason, I'd not noticed that quite as much before. I didn't know if it was just the trip or if things were just, in fact, getting busier. Because for sure, the place that we moved here from is definitely booming. Like, it's growing a lot. But, you know, those things were on my mind as well, of kind of like, you know, I don't know if we fit here. And then on top of that, I never knew if it was a good idea to send our kids all through the same high school that Gary and I had gone through. I just wanted them to feel like they could have their own experiences. And that was something that was always on my mind. That had been on my mind since we moved back to where we moved back to our hometown.
And so we did look in Utah around for in a more expanded way, saying, well, let's look to more rural places in Utah, because Utah has its own countryside. And what we found is, fundamentally, what we wanted had changed in such that beauty, for example, was a fundamental requirement. And for some reason, mountains was too. And if you need to understand that about me, go back to yesterday's episode where we hit for, you know, half an hour the symbolic importance of mountains.
Yep.
And so as we looked for those places that were beautiful by mountains in Utah that would allow us to, you know, another thing I should add in is, like, COVID really shook us, at least me, into saying, let's go full into this life that we kind of know we want, but we're just willing to dip our toe a month ago. Let's go all the way.
Yeah, and I was a late adopter to that mentality.
Yeah, it would take Sarah a while.
I really have a close relationship with my family. My family's all in Utah, and I find those relationships beautiful. Yeah. Just like you maybe found mountains beautiful.
So so anyway, yeah, as I looked in Utah for that reason, to stay close to things, it was just not finding that because Utah, a lot of the beautiful places have been built out and subdivided and subdivided. And if you can find even 10 acres of land in a beautiful place in Utah with some water by some mountains, you must pay an exorbitant amount in order for that because it's become so valuable today. So
or be like totally off grid, like totally.
Yeah, yeah, there is that too, like way
which
off
was
in
very
the mountains,
undesirable
which
for us.
is a little bit of possibility. But yeah, then you have a lot of infrastructure problems to deal with.
Yeah.
So just because of that, that's what led us ultimately to be saying, maybe we should be looking in surrounding states.
Yeah.
Right. And so we did start looking there. But ultimately, as I've explained before, I said, Montana's always been there in my mind as a place. There's something inside of me said, go check out, and hadn't yet. But so right there in the thick of lockdown, I take this trip with two of my daughters, and we drive all over Montana. And yeah, this particular valley just strikes something deep into me. It's got the mountains, it's got the beauty, it's greener. There is agriculture going on here, but it's not too built out. There's possibility here. So that's where, let's get back to Sara and
Which
have
really,
her pick
I knew
up.
that was I was in trouble when I got that phone call of like, Sara, I just drove through the most beautiful place. I mean, that was like the second day of your trip, I think. Because before it'd been, like I talked to you the day before and you're like, yeah, it's nice, but it's nice kind of thing.
Yeah, we've gone through a lot of places in Idaho and
oh my goodness, the excitement in Gary's voice, I knew I was in trouble. And so
So I'll take you. I come home and say, we must go there. Like, I must take you there.
Right. He really wanted us to see it.
At least you have to see this so you can at least see.
So this was all happening really fast.
Seen.
And I was like, can we go somewhere? Like COVID, like the world is shut down, Gary. But you're like, no, it's fine.
And it turns out there was exceptions for people, looking for real estate or something like that.
There was exceptions for that. And that was actually good exception.
Perfectly fine.
It was perfectly fine. But I just remember I after I talked to Gary, I kind of thought for a minute, and all I thought was, Gary has a lot of ideas. A lot of ideas are thrown out. But this one I could tell he was serious about. So I did call one of my sisters that I'm really close to, and I'm like, Gary's in Montana, and he just found a place that he thinks is really beautiful. And I feel like I should just tell you this so that in case something does come out of this, you won't be like, where did that come from? Because it really felt quite a bit out of the blue for our families. Because we hadn't really shared many of our dreams or aspirations for living a countryside life either. Like it just we kind of got back to Utah, and it's like things were just busy and everything like that. And it was like Gary said,
it's not like stuff you generally just go around.
Yeah, like guess what we're
proclaiming
thinking of,
to other people.
I think that they knew that we were really interested in land and animals and things like that, but maybe that's just where it ended. But they weren't there for that transformation of when things went from just dipping our toe into like all in, which really made so much more sense at that point, especially with COVID influencing us, realizing the benefits that could happen from that kind of a lifestyle, regardless of anything else.
So real quick, I'm going to interject. Just want to recognize those that are here on the stream, live for this live portion. Some of you will be watching this later, but there's at least a few people here live today. So just wanted to say hello to Steve and Martin and Virgil. Thanks for your your participation in the chat so far. And Steve, thanks for the kind words. Martin, I remembered you did that question when I was talking about kind of the Bilbo and the journey, and maybe how it could change you for bad as well. That is, I think, a possibility of change. Is a journey is there is a possibility of negative change. I think it's less likely. That's why I would recommend journeys, but done in the wrong way.
Well, it's like if you don't have the right intentions, it's probably going to go bad. But if you really think through your intentions.
Yeah, if you notice, like, with kind of the regular hero's adventure thing with Bilbo, it's the wizard that comes a-knocking, and of course there's a tie-in with that, and God kind of coming and knocking and bringing in the dwarves that kind of unsettle you and get you off onto that adventure. It's not exactly like you choose to go a lot of times. So if you're going for the wrong reasons and you're not inspired by the wizard, you could say maybe it wouldn't turn out well. And even like, you know, in the other one with Frodo, he comes back and in some ways, you know, he's damaged. He's kind of damaged goods in some ways, you could say. And that's why he can't even stay in his homeland anymore, which now that I think about it, you know, sounds a little bit like us, like not being able to stay put when you come back from an adventure. It's kind of interesting that way.
Yeah.
You also said, Martin, you know, is the stream dead? Hopefully everything's back. We're getting good indications here from the control board that YouTube gives us, but one never knows. So at least hopefully it's recorded and uploaded later so people can see it. I hope it's not dead. But also, Quick Strides, hello and welcome and happy to have you along the way. So that being recognized, and please do make any other comments or questions along the way. We'd love to answer them as we can get to them. But let's jump back. And one thing I want to ask Sara is, before I had even ever proposed this idea of Montana or gone there myself, I'd like to know what did Montana, you know, occupy in your mind? What were your impressions?
My impressions of Montana were that my dad had spent a summer there, like living in a shack practically by himself, doing some livestock tending. That was it.
That was it?
No, and truthfully, I have a cousin that lives up here and a friend from high school. They live in different parts of Montana. So they had given me a very beautiful impression of Montana, but didn't fill in all of the gaps, especially because Gary was looking somewhere so different. Because when you were looking, the word Indian reservation came out of that's where this place was. And that just seemed like...
Well, and also, you know, I'm sure, you know, Montanans themselves aren't unaware that, like, it's not all positive views that everybody has about Montana. What are some of the negative things that, again, society kind of gives you, or maybe that you had impressions from family that had lived here or something that might come out as the negative sides of Montana? Yeah,
I mean, just rural, far away from, well, first of all, far away from them, which was a concern of mine as well. But I mean, it just felt like I hadn't really given it much thought. I just thought of it as like maybe a place you go for a family vacation sometime and go camping. How's that?
Well, and so I'd say all that. But one thing that I don't think you mentioned yet is it's a little rough of a place. You know, you hear about a lot of drinking in Montana and things like that. So I mean, these are things that it's not like it's hidden, you know, knowledge about Montana that. And then, and to an extent, with Montana, that's a bit of the pride of the place, right? Is that it is a little bit rougher of a place. But that's some of the things that you hear, like from family that's lived here. Is you know, the high schools.
So as far as that goes,
there's a lot of drinking.
So my initial impressions were that it's just like some place to go camp and vacation in. But like as you start to know other people, all of those things were brought up, especially because it's just out of where a lot of members of our church are.
Yeah. No.
And that was kind of a concern for
me. At least
me.
you think.
It turns out that wasn't the truth at all. Yeah. But, you know, I was leaving kind of that kind of safety zone.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's worth mentioning for those of you that are not members of our faith and living internationally and stuff. There's actually quite a bit of history in the Western United States that's bound up with our particular religion, the Latter-day Saints, you know, otherwise known as the Mormons, but you know, we've, for reasons I can get into later, refer to ourselves as the Latter-day Saints. Anyway, a lot of the West, not just Utah. Most people know about Utah as like this state that has this history with the Latter-day Saints, but it turns out a lot of the West was settled by Latter-day Saints, including places in Idaho and even Nevada and Arizona, Wyoming and stuff. So there's kind of a corridor, you could say, where they're even if people don't belong to the faith has the tradition has influenced the culture, and there's a continuity there. And sometimes Montana is grouped into that, but it's kind of
it's usually not skipped over up to Canada.
It's definitely more Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and Arizona. Nevada, not Las Vegas.
Nevada, not Las Vegas.
You know, the rest of Nevada and Arizona. Whereas like Colorado and New Mexico definitely have kind of gone a different way. They're more, you know, politically different, just culturally very different. So just to give you a little background on the dynamics of the Western United States, that's why even us, we would kind of feel a sense of comfort in, you know, Idaho especially.
Yeah.
Arizona, there's tons of people from our faith
Definitely.
there. But yeah, you get up and towards Montana, and it's like, oh, I don't know if that many.
Well, and the truth is, we
there.
just didn't know people. But okay, I totally have the perfect first impression of Montana that I should have thought of. You're probably thinking of this in the first place. Is that I had an uncle that lived here, and they raised their family here, and I mean, many of their kids did not have a positive friend experience. It was hard to find friends and people to connect with, and hard to find, I don't know, just kind of like a place to fit in, because especially where they lived was a bit rough, even rougher, I'd say, than here, according to the stories. Yeah. I mean, it was not, by his stories, I think that he thought we were totally crazy.
Yeah. So I wanted to get that out, because even from people that are from Montana, it's useful to know how kind of the rest of the world or different pockets of the world look at you. I mean, one thing that I think is universal about Montana is that everybody knows that there's beauty here, and at least in parts of it. I think the general impression is people know that Glacier National Park is here. You know there's mountains. You know that there's at least some sense of the plains of Montana. Because it turns out Montana is almost like two states in the sense that it has the mountainous part and the big open plains part. But anyway, that's another thing that people know about it, and at least is there in your mind. That's the main thing that drew me. I knew of the mountainous beauty.
Yeah.
At least had the pictures in my mind and whatnot, which drove us there. So it's at least worth mentioning those kind of things. So yeah, let's take it. I convinced Sara to get all the family, get in our van, and drive up to Montana to check things out. We even talked with a real estate agent that was going to show us around and check out places. So what was that initial trip like for you?
A lot of children were not happy. So a lot of that trip was comforting children that were worried that we were going to be moving, and at the same time, also trying to think what things would be myself, just trying to keep an open mind. But you know what? I'm really going to give this a chance. Gary's really doing his job of trying to think of a place that's good for our family, and he's really excited about it. I mean, Gary's excitement was just Gary doesn't get excited about tons of things like that. So I couldn't ignore it. But, I just was trying to have an open mind the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one thing I would point in that we've talked about in recent days is that, most people out there in the world, I think, have maybe 2, maybe 3 grand kind of transformations, possibilities of transformation, life transformation in them in their life. There's the transformation from child through adolescence to adult. There's a transformation of getting married. Oftentimes for people is a grand life transformation. But most people don't have more than that. They can't handle more than that. And already with our family, I'd asked my family, in essence, with the travel and things and leaving things that we had rooted them in, to already transform during that. And I knew that going somewhere like Montana was going to be asking my family another, grand transformation to them in their life. And so I knew that was going to be the challenge, especially after we had this notion we were going to come home and kind of be tranquil for a while. So that was my task. And so, I knew I had to kind of tread lightly, even while I was excited and whatnot.
And he knew that, and that is very true. I mean, talking about transformations, I know I'm not as good at seeking out those transformations in my own life. Sometimes they've just kind of happened. But it was hard for me to imagine settling in a place like Montana, because speaking of transformations, when we got married, or when I met Gary, he wanted to be a journalist. When we got married, we quickly were swept off to law school, and Gary's initial talk was I want to clerk on the Supreme Court, and that may
pretty
not
pretentious.
Yeah. Well, no, but I think that's pretty normal for that. So
probably most people that go to law school and end up at
and that was a good thing. I actually thought it was a good thing. Sorry,
yeah, I should do that.
Well, right, because it seemed like a good thing to do. But then kind of going through all of those different thoughts, right in law school.
Yeah, that was a transformation. We totally changed attitudes. Yeah,
But then skipping quickly over to the end of law school, where we left law school with Gary's intentions to go and start a restaurant immediately after passing the bar.
Right, and never practicing law.
And never practicing law.
That was a huge transformation.
Yep, and then just
doing a small business.
Yeah, and then just going into being an entrepreneur, which, I mean, all of these things, like, I always knew that Gary would be an entrepreneur. I knew that from when I met him in high school. But, you know, I didn't exactly see Montana farmer, although you and I always had an appreciation for this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I should say, after all those transformations that had already occurred in her life that I'd asked Sarah to do again and again, here was yet another one. But if maybe this is kind of emerging, if there's one thing to take from this podcast today, which I always think, or, you know, I'm always aiming more for meaning than just entertainment, it would be that, you know, over the time, and I hope you'll agree with this, that, you know, we've seen the value of being people that can perennially, you could say, transform, right? Because if you can do that, then you put yourself into a process of perpetual development, and you kind of live in the cycles of life that you see out there, cycles of growth, death, you know, and decay, and then regrowth, kind of development that now we're in all the time. And you turn that into a process of development where, again, my claim is that most people can only handle that a couple times, and then what? Then they just kind of coast through the rest of their life. And to me, that's like that's damnation, right? That's hell.
That's true. I mean, I totally agree with you on that. I think the one thing I would add to that, though, that we've also talked about is my like huge hope to teach my kids how to be stable and make do with their world that they're in. I mean, not have to always be seeking after these big things and sometimes even missing the mark, thinking that they're going to have this incredible transformation, but instead they've just gone so far that they're just kind of lost and wandering.
Yes, and this is why it's good to have Sarah here, because that is the other grand principle, you know, that I hope we hit all the time.
Right.
You know, that would be the more masculine side of things, a kind of a pillar of order in your life. Right.
I don't know if I want to be the masculine.
Well, we all have the masculine and the feminine inside of us, but yeah, that's that pillar of order and stability.
Well, how about creating that potential?
But around you, around you is more the feminine. You want to be a union of these two things, of stability with a process of renewal and transformation. And when you have those two things, you can hold yourself together and transform into something better, where if you don't have that stability, you fly apart, and that's death and disillusion. And
I mean, that's one of the hard things, like when you're talking about journeys and going on them for the right reasons, that's the thing that I've already said before, but like I want our kids to realize, like, you can't have these experiences kind of take over what's most important ever. Like what's a good example? Like I get worried about.
You can't just go seeking novelty.
Like
an
adventure. Travel sometimes really bothers me when people talk about travel and they need these experiences. Cause I'm like, no, those aren't really going to help you be the person.
Entertainment and amusement on
exactly.
travel. You know?
So I hope we're still teaching our kids to be kind of. I mean, content is the wrong word. Stable, able to kind of handle life, even if it's not doing some of the things that we've done.
Having a sense of peace, a sense of peace, of
being
wholeness,
peaceful, and then
at the same time that you have a sense of wanting to
and having that
grow
wisdom
and improve,
when the adventure comes. Because I think that we've learned that no matter what in life, you are still presented with all sorts of things that will help you grow in really important ways. They might not look exactly like a year in Europe, but something else will happen. It's just kind of how life is. If you're really looking to grow and develop and become a better person.
Yeah. And that's another good point here, is that by no means are we saying, you know, traveling like we did, or even moving to a farmstead is what we think everybody else should do. We're merely offering these as the ways that we tried to pay attention to life, we're kind of called to do in our environment and circumstances, where everybody's going to be, something different. There's going to be other journeys, other adventures, other calls to do things. And we totally recognize it. So we're not offering anything as an example of particulars. You know, if anything, we're trying to share the principles that were behind what we've done. But with that, let's get back to the actual narrative. And so, you know, we've come here to Montana, I've got you here. And what was your initial impression of this valley?
The clouds were covering the mountains.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a problem.
That was a problem because
Initially.
Gary's like, I promise it's so gorgeous. Those mountains are so tall, you wouldn't believe it. And there were like lower mountains that were exposed, but the clouds were covering the taller mountains.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as the valley went, I could see the potential. I could understand why you were excited about this area because the valley itself is beautiful. You could see that there was enough going on that you weren't going to live without interacting with other people at all. I mean, the other thing that was
people.
Yeah, the other thing that was really exciting to me is as we drove into the valley, our church was right there, like very prominently exposed to the highway. And I'm like, hey, automatically. And then we drove a little bit more down the street and there was another church. And then there was another one right by our Airbnb.
And what's cool is not just our church, but churches of all sorts.
Exactly. It's just that was
which I also like. I appreciate.
Yeah, but that was like a thing for me of knowing that I would have a place here automatically because that was a concern for me. I didn't want to just go and I knew Gary would be able to fill up his time with a lot of things, but I wanted to see where my place was going to be here. And I already knew having, my church right here around me was going to help me so much and make it a place that I could make home. So
how about what were your initial thoughts of what an Indian reservation meant?
Oh, yes.
And what then was your reality upon seeing it for the first time and experiencing this area?
So, I mean, my dad had served a mission for our church on an Indian reservation somewhere else in the United States. And it seemed like it was impossible for us to live on an Indian reservation, just judging by the stories and experiences and the regulations and rules that particular place he'd been in brought. And so I was just kind of like, I don't get it. I didn't understand how that could be possible. And it sounded kind of, it just sounded maybe a little bit scary because I felt like we were going to be limited in our ability to do things that we wanted to or live by some other rule set that was going to be learned and tricky to adopt into our lives. But that didn't turn out to be the case. So
yeah, we can only speak to our experience here, but this is not what most people would think of an Indian reservation would be like, for the main reason that it doesn't feel that different for most intents and purposes from
just
anywhere else.
Just a little more beautiful.
It is more beautiful, and see, that's actually everything of this place being an Indian reservation, in my mind, has only been a positive thing. Some people that live here don't see it that way, but I think a lot of people do, in as much, especially as the tribal government and council has significant control over some of the way that the land is handled here. And there's this tribal wilderness area here that's much like a national park, but handled a little bit differently than a national park that leans it more towards wilderness than just kind of park, you could say, as far as kind of perfectly maintained trails and things like that. And so, as it's turned out, all of our experiences thus far have been positive with it being an Indian reservation. And so, that's like that. Anyway. Back to you because I interject too much sometimes.
Not at all. No, you help me not be nervous here because I get nervous about getting my thoughts through clearly because I don't always do the best at that. But I will add though, and I think I've already said this on here, but as we looked at a lot of other properties, like it was kind of surreal to be looking at properties thinking, are we really going to be here? Like I can't even see what it's going to be like exactly. Like being major in between just in the decision-making time and then looking at properties to purchase. That was really tough because I'm just kind of like, living in Utah, the perfect street to live on because I'd lived there for so long. I knew that this street was much more desirable than the street that was, less than a quarter mile away, little things like that. And so I was nervous about making the wrong choice and, really trying to make sure that I felt like I had God with me to make the decision. But while I was still feeling a bit fearful and timid of the decision that needed to be made as well. But there was definitely something about this particular property when we came and saw this property. That was probably the first time that I was like, okay, I actually can kind of see how this would work because this property already had a house on it, which was huge because a lot of the other places we looked were just plots.
Yeah, just land.
Or they would be houses that were way too small for our family. And I know us that sometimes we're like ambitious. We're like, yeah, we're going to build. We're going to redo this house or we're going to do something. But it just takes so long. The realities of doing that kind of a project is hard. So it wasn't really until we got here that I could even start to really think about what it'd be like to live here, kind of envision my life here and, feel like I could start to really make that decision. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna go to some of the more comments that come in on the chat. Quick Strides was mentioning that our mutual grandpa, because this is my cousin, had lived in Montana at some point, and his dad saw Star Wars here when it came out. So that's
awesome.
A good little tidbit. Yeah, Martin said you also had an English teacher who was both a Mormon from Utah or Montana. So that's good that you had that. You said how long did the drive take? So it's 9 hours from where we are. So it's
far.
You can do it in a day. It takes most of the day, and so that was something as we're doing this drive, saying, could we?
This is far.
Do we want to be this far?
And not
away?
all of the drive is pretty. Like when we were in Europe, most all of our drives were so pretty.
Yeah,
they really were.
I mean, there's some exceptions,
but it was new and novel and exciting. So no matter what, there was something to be gained from it. I had already done that drive up to Idaho so many times. It's like I knew it. It's like, it wasn't exciting.
Yeah, for those of you that don't live in the United States or have been to the Western United States, you probably hear a lot of the beauty, and you see that in movies and stuff of the rugged, natural places in the Western United States. But it turns out because there's a lot of arid, kind of deserty regions, or just regions that have been turned to just kind of pure farmland, there's a lot of places in the West that aren't exactly picturesque, big, long stretches of drives. And so much of the drive up here from Utah isn't as picturesque as maybe would be desired, especially in certain times of year when it's not green. But once you hit, once you get to actually Montana and you're crossing into Montana, it is pretty beautiful from then on. There's not a lot of places. I've been in Montana, and I haven't been a lot to the eastern part, but there's not a lot of places in the western part of Montana that aren't just beautiful. So that at least was good on the drive up.
That's true.
Part of it was building the argument, or not the argument, but building my case for why we should do this. LSJT, you said you come on here late, and so you wanted to know, and we can maybe move things in this direction, because we did. Having been to this place where we ended up was the last place we visited on like a 3-day process of looking at maybe 10 to 15 different properties, and this one was the very last one we did, and it just blew all the other ones away. And there was something very special about it. It's this combination of both kind of forested land as far as and also kind of meadow pasture land attached to it. It has a creek running through it. You can see glimpses of it on our channel in the different videos if you want to. But that left at least me being like, okay, that was the place, and convinced that I wanted to do it. I wanted to leave that open, that this was still a process of deciding with my family. But that leads us into, one. So let's do two things from this point. We can say, what was that process like? Because it was a process for Sara to see if she, ultimately could go along with me. Because, we talk a lot about masculine and feminine dynamics on this channel. And one thing that I see as the role of the masculine is to set out a possibility, is to set out a vision. And certainly that's what I felt I should do in this case. But then, the feminine in the body of any kingdom or organization has to decide if they want to go along with that or not. And so we'll talk about what was that process like for Sara, and then we'll get to LSJT, your comment of that inevitably meant leaving family and friends, and so let's kind of hit both those areas, I think, for the rest of the program.
Okay, I have to add really fast that one thing that I really liked about this property too is that we have a lane of neighbors.
Yes.
And that was something that was really important to me, because I wanted people close enough by that we could have friendships and, kind of a community just really close to us, because that's what I've always been used to.
And they'd probably never listen to these, but we even have great next door neighbors, which
isn't always we
an
love.
Point.
I mean, we have people around us that are cheering for us and supporting us. Maybe some of you think we're a little crazy, but overall, really, really positive experience with their neighbors here on our street. Okay, so the process of me moving here.
Once it was clear that I was setting this out as
I mean, this is
the
a difficult story to
division.
tell because it's not over yet. Because,
yeah, that's true.
Because it's like there's still times here that I'm like, oh my goodness, what are we doing here? You know, like what just happened? But I mean, like I said, when we came up here, I was trying to be really open to the fact that I want Gary to be the leader and lead out in our family. And I also had to tell myself under a lot of other circumstances, I wouldn't be so hard on Gary. Like if he was a computer like software engineer and he'd gotten a job somewhere else, I wouldn't have even thought twice. I would have thought, no, of course I'm going to go with him. He's providing for our family and he's doing what he should, what I want him to do.
That's the way the world kind of teaches you is like, okay, if your job, is going to take you to Hong Kong or whatever, or to the East Coast, you have to do that because that's what you do is you follow your job. That's our value system, right? But if you choose to go a place, it completely changes.
It's kind of a problem.
The dynamic.
Yeah. Well, and see, but Gary's chosen a few times things that didn't need to be done, like going to Europe and things like that. So I think that the capital starts to wear off, especially with family around us, because it's like, wait a second, Gary's just off doing all of these things that he likes to do, but that's irrelevant. The point is that I was trying to be open and realizing that I could tell that Gary was trying to be thoughtful. And I mean, coming here, you realize that he wasn't crazy. It was like, oh, okay, this is a place that fills so many of the things that I want. The only thing it didn't fill was being by family in Utah. That was the thing it didn't fill. So that was the hardest part because as far as the property went, fantastic. As far as the community here went, it was like, even though I don't know what all the, you could see that, things could be okay. And by that point, I'd also started to call people in our church, people outside of our church. I'd gotten contacts. It seems like when you start to tell people what's going on in your life, people are like, oh, well, I know this person, and I had more people to call and contact. And I mean, all of the responses I got from them were pretty much positive and, encouraging for us. But, I mean, these things come down to for me. I mean, it was a matter of everything was making sense. Nothing seemed like it was totally going to make me miserable or terrible. Gary was being very we were talking all the time about this. And he realized that he needed to say things like, I will make sure that you can get back to Utah whenever you need to see your family. And I will always support you in that. I will support you in the things that you need to do when we live here. There were lots of assurances that were being given, and I could tell he was being sincere with. And those things really helped. So, I mean, after that, it just turned into a matter of prayer and filling it out and feeling like if this really makes sense. And that's what it came down to. Yeah. And it felt good.
I think I also had to kind of, in addition to that, try to lay out, which is kind of my job to do, articulate a value system. Say like, look, isn't this through our life in the last few years, hasn't this emerged as kind of the value system the values that we now hold? And isn't it the case that we can't actually realize those? We tried, we looked, we couldn't realize the full set of values that, again, I've tried to articulate on other episodes and things in the place we were at. And so it's tough to face that when there are other things in consideration. There's always trade-offs in life.
Yeah.
Again, especially that proximity to family. But that was part of the problem, is that we couldn't, even with our families, ultimately they are not looking for this type of life. And so you couldn't have it both, right? You couldn't have both being by family and living out these other values. You had to, in essence, choose. And so let me put that question to you next, is that when you start announcing this to your family, by its very nature, you're never going to frame it this way, but by its very nature, you are underlying it as the implicit reality that you are choosing to leave them.
Right.
You are in essence saying, I think there's something better somewhere else in some way, not necessarily that I don't like you or I'm rejecting you as a person, but I am in some way saying I think there's something better elsewhere, at least as far as your personal opinion. So how was that?
I mean, it's hard, and it still is, because it's like there's the shock of us just moving, which brought on all sorts of like, what? Like, how is this happening? This isn't what you really want, Sara, is it? Like, this is just what Gary wants, right? And, having to have really difficult conversations about that. And it wasn't just with family, it was with friends and people, neighbors, and all sorts of things like that. Because we lived in an area that we really knew, and we had a lot of people around us that knew us and loved us. And I don't even know how to explain better than just like, it was just hard. It was just hard because it took a lot of, I'm not always the greatest communicator, and I'm very busy with my children. And so there wasn't a lot of lead up to this. It came as a very big shock for a lot of people. And, it definitely hurt people's feelings, and it hurt me to be the person that was hurting their feelings. But I mean, for me, it wasn't just, I don't even know how to exactly I'll put it, but it was just something that I had to become more and more resolved that I would make things still work with my family, because that was never going to be something that was never going to be not part of my life. And I was just going to have to figure out how to make it work, because it was more important to me that we moved here and became a family here than sort of pandering to some of the emotions or solving some of the fundamental questions of why we moved here. It was just more of one of those things where eventually it was like, you know what, we're just going to have to live this out and show people that it's going to be okay. And we're still in a process here.
Yeah.
We're not even a year here. We're celebrating like the year mark when we came and first visited here, almost, not quite. And
at the very least in it, we weren't saying to anybody we're rejecting you as a person because we don't like you, because actually there's still in underlying, and I hope we've conveyed this to family and friends, that there's an invitation, come do this with us, right? But in essence, there is a rejection in terms of values, right? Because that's where, like we've been over many times on this channel, there's in essence kind of looking at the modern Western world and the way it's been laid out, especially when it's built out like in very structures of the way we've structured our cities, that there's no real changing that. There's no real going back in terms of the values that have now been put into stone and concrete and power lines and things like that. You can't just, take it out and remove it, right? So it's there, it's built in. And so in essence, we are saying we're rejecting that, right?
Yeah, but we weren't rejecting the people themselves.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is why there's an invitation, for anybody else that wants to do this to also do this.
Which would be super cool.
Yeah, and also again, let me say, with that, it's not like we think there's this perfect utopic thing here either. There's just more possibility of trying to live out the values that ultimately we had underlying things.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to come off like we have anything figured out. This is just our specific story that we have to share.
Exactly.
And I share it hesitantly because I don't want to sound like I know what's up or what's going on. This is just the process that we've been going through.
We can't say that enough.
Yeah, can't say that enough.
Looking at Stefan, glad you're on here, and you had some comments that I wanted to address. So you've asked Sara, and so we'll let her answer. How can one meet a woman that is so supportive and understanding to her man in the way that you are towards Gary? I have not been in relationship releasing, but it seems hard to meet such a partner. I mean, specifically with so many in Western society now focused on career, achieving success, and following the progressive society norms and values, which might not make one fulfilled.
Thank you. That's nice. I don't know if I'm not always a supportive person. Maybe some of these things. I mean, maybe one thing I would just say to put in with that is I feel so incredibly blessed to found someone that I dated a lot of people before I married Gary. And I don't think there are very many people that would have really been okay with me having 8 kids. And that was actually something that I had really hoped for, a large family, maybe not necessarily 8, but there's the hope. And I knew, Gary has supported me through that. And it's been been some crazy
I wanted it
times.
Too, so it's easy to support.
Which makes me really well.
Yeah,
but
it wasn't like there had to be negotiation.
But I think that there's something, no, there never was negotiation. That's for sure. But I've always felt very supported in that, and I've also been very supported at being able to stay home and take care of those kids, which has been the biggest blessing in my life up until now. It's really what I've wanted to do. So, but I mean, one thing that helped us was, and I said this on the last time I was here. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot. But, we came from the same church. We had a lot of the same values within that church. And then when we decided to be married, we chose to be married in our church's temple. And when you marry in that temple, there are promises and covenants that you make there.
Well, the whole temple is about basically having you accept a framework of values. And
right.
So by unifying yourself there, you're already accepting a core, shared world of values, you could say, to kind of start your lives with.
And wouldn't you say that's made such a difference in our marriage?
Yeah.
Because it makes it so when hard things do come up, you sort of have a foundation, a base, a groundwork on where to work up from there.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to add a little bit the side of reality, into it as well, in the sense that, with anything that's been more out of the mainstream that I've, tried to put out there as a vision or even proposed as a vision, it's not like these things Sara has just been like, oh yeah, I see that that's great. And here I'm accepting it and going along with it. Like,
nope. I'm usually like the person that tears them down first.
Yeah, usually there's an initial reaction of
nope,
against,
no way,
against
no thank you.
So that's been one of the major things we've had to work through in our marriage. So that's part of it that I think it's good for you to hear, that you don't just find these people that these kind of soulmate people where everything just coalesces. But here's what actually helped to make it work through. So in those moments where I'd propose a non-mainstream idea or course of what we should do next as a family, and Sara initially feels resistance, one of the things I'll bring up is how strange it is that if I was bringing this up in the context of kind of mainstream society of saying, my job, I just have to do what my job is telling me to do. So we've got to move to Hong Kong because the partners say that's what I need to do to kind of stay in this career. And by the way, I'm working 80 hours a week and I'm never, around, but you just kind of accept that because that's what society tells you to do. And a lot of women just go along with that, right? As far as being like, oh, I guess that's just the way things are. And my husband's supporting our family, so that's good. So I'll bring that up and be like, here's what's strange is that I know that society would support you in going along with that kind of crazy movement, which probably wouldn't be all in all beneficial for our family, especially not me like working an 80-hour work week. But in this kind of crazy non-mainstream idea, you feel a resistance. And why is that? And we have to kind of root through that, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, this is usually what ends up working, where I do get Sara's support. And that's that we get into, these things I talk about again and again on this channel of these masculine and feminine dynamics. And it's that I say, look, I have a role, right? And my role is to care for the well-being of the family. I am supposed to be the head of the family, which means I need to present a vision, and in that vision, my role is to essentially sacrifice myself for the well-being of that which is you could say below me, not in importance, but just in the structure, the symbolic structure, right? And so in as much as I'm doing that, as I'm caring about you in making this vision, then you have a choice. You have a choice of either saying I reject that, in which case you lose me being the benefit of leading out, of presenting visions, of taking the head of the family and sacrificing myself for the family, and you leave me really only the option of not doing that or being dependent on you to present the vision. Say like, now you have to do that if you don't want me to do that. So it leaves that dynamic where it doesn't mean a woman or the family doesn't have a choice, but the choice is either is to say, if this person is again doing their job of looking to something higher for their vision, so sacrificing themselves to something higher and sacrificing to us as far as caring for us and doing this in our well-being, then actually that's pretty valuable. In the end of the day, when you put it in those terms, Sarah has to decide which of those she wants, right? So anyway.
And I mean, listening to you say that, like, it sounds kind of like harsh, or, I mean, I know a lot of people would listen to what you just said and be like, whoa, but like, I mean,
but it does cut through and clarify.
It does
right?
cut through and clarify. But I mean, with that, I would just make sure that people realize that, like, you always realize that.
Well, and let's just say that we see ourselves both as the head. We are both part of the
Yeah.
head of the family.
Like you wouldn't just do something that you knew that I hated and say you would kind of have to be okay with this, or else I'm not going to present another vision for the family. Like,
which is why in all these kind of crazy decisions we've done, there has been hours and hours and hours of talk.
And a few more hours after that.
Yeah. It hasn't been a thing of imposing anything or.
It's
or
like
that.
really trying to really understand and come to the right conclusion together.
But at the end of the day, if I feel like, this is the framework. If something above me, God, if I feel in me sacrificing my will to God, God wants our family to do something, and I feel like I'm looking and caring for our family, at the end of the day, I have to say, look, this is the vision that I have. You have a choice to either follow it or not follow it. But if you don't follow it, you essentially lose me as being
playing that role.
Yeah. And you
as
have
the head
to,
of the family,
you have to deal with those consequences then, and that really puts it as it should be. And
very stark.
Yeah. And so Sarah has to, and then it frames it right for Sarah, because she has to decide, okay, this isn't about what I want. It's not what is convenient or nice or mainstream with society. It asks, what does the higher thing in life, the divine, God want for our family? And so it clarifies what she has to find out as well. It's not about her. It's also about her trying to say, am I in touch with that divine thing or not?
Absolutely. And the nice thing is, I feel like when it does work this way, I feel like I am entitled, that's a bad word, to that kind of feeling of peace and kind of getting that same kind of revelation from God that you would too, because we are the same, working as the head together.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly.
Which is what happened with moving up here, obviously.
Yeah.
Although it was hard to leave, and that those other emotions that come, because my family is so wonderful, and it, just kind of working out those feelings of leaving our family and what was comfortable, and our neighbors, our really awesome neighbors. I mean, our community there, it was hard. It still is hard.
LSJT has just put on another question that I think would be great for you. So you can show a little bit about how our story is a little different.
These are tough questions.
But you LSJT, you're right. You say you went on a lot of dates before you met your husband. Can I ask what specifically you looked for when dating, or was it just an instinctual thing vibe?
Oh, I mean, like.
So you kind of got to give the background of our thing. Is it wasn't just you dated a lot and then we met. You got to give the.
See, this is what would be useful for a whole nother video, because we met in high school, but we knew we could not date exclusively. We knew we couldn't date exclusively if we really wanted things to work out. And we were both very open and realized that we had to date other people and like each other, and sometimes just look from afar. Like we'd show up at a high school dance and Gary was with another girl and I'd be with another guy, and you had to pretend that wasn't happening.
Yeah, but all the while, we had something going on as well.
It's hard to explain, but it was that's how it went. And I guess maybe there's something about high school that makes it easy to live those two different worlds. But I was not off kissing or having any physical relationship with anybody else. Neither were you.
Dating at least in our culture means
literally just going out and being with people and going out on dates.
Treating people to a date, taking care of them on the date, etc. Associating, learning what you like in a person and what you don't. There's not obligations of intimacy that go along with the dates themselves.
Exactly, which I think is important to clarify, because then when I would go out on dates with people, it became a lot easier to tell just through conversation and how someone would treat me, and the kind of questions that they would ask, really the kind of date that they would plan would help me realize if I wanted to go on another date with that person and get to know them more and more and more. So
at the end of the day, we knew each other for 3.5 years before we got married. We had met in high school and had this process of both the romance going on while at the same time also, dating a lot of other people. And then I went on, a religious service mission, or proselyting and service mission for 2 years. And that's when, you
I
can
dated,
maybe talk about that.
Because when Gary left, we left with no promises. Some people in our church would leave with a promise. We're like, I'm going to wait for you. I'm not going to date. I'm going to be faithful to you. No way. That was not the way that we approached it. It's like we knew that we liked each other. And I knew that if he went off and had a successful mission, that would only make me enjoy him more. He would enjoy me knowing that I was off having a good experience back at home, because I wasn't old enough, nor did I feel the desire to serve a mission, because girls can serve missions for our church. But I was actually too young to even be able to go on a mission. But
so how about what, like when, so let's, to get to, more specific part of her question, let's say during all that dating, including with me and while I was gone, what were you looking for specifically that you didn't find in all those other guys?
Real. I mean, when I'd go on those, so 2 things here. One thing that was really cool about dating Gary was that when we had things, I could bring up issues or concerns or questions I had about his character or how he did things in his life. And he'd always have a response, and we'd work through those things together. He wasn't offended. He wasn't hurt. Like if I kind of didn't like something that you did or had a question about how you approach something in life. I'm trying to think of more specific examples, but it was almost fun to work things out together because we could feel our relationship reaching new levels. Like we decided not to go to 2, this is going to sound trivial, but like we decided to not go to 2 high school dances together back to back, because then it would look like we were dating, and we knew that would really hurt our relationship. But it was like being able to talk.
Well, and other people would then not
ask me out, because they'd be like, it's Gary's girl, and we didn't want to pair off quite that exclusively. But like it was fun to work through that with you, because we realized more and more with the things we had in common, our goals were the same and things like that. But then once Gary left on his mission, I had to treat it like if I could find someone better or that I loved more or anything like that, I had to be that open to it, because I think that things would have been really miserable while you were gone for that 2-year period otherwise, and just kind of made things unnatural. But I mean, I dated some really great guys, but I never found anyone that had that same kind of, when you talk about like, was it something that was, instinctual? I mean, there was something that still always drew me back. So there was still that attraction was always greater in Gary. But, I would still go, I didn't ever like have another boyfriend, but I'd still go on repeated dates with other guys that did start to treat me really well or seemed to really care for me a lot. And I don't know of a good way to explain this. Can you help me out? Like, you know what I'm trying to say?
I mean, of course I have my systematized ways. I like to talk about this stuff because that's what I do.
And but, I just don't do it. I don't know how to explain it quite as well.
Well, no, that's all. Those are all good points. I mean, the fundamental thing that I get down to with any sort of dating or anything that's fundamentally a sexual relationship is that you look at it in its simplest, most symbolic terms, right? You're trying to test out who you could make a union with, in essence, who you could combine with in order to become a new whole being, right? Yeah. And so in dating, I mean, that's to me the fundamental thing you're there to test is that, okay, I'm here, and in the course of a date, you're doing symbolic things like eating, the same food with each other. If that goes well, then you might, hold their hand, and again, you're unifying. You might go to a dance and dance together where you are, in a literal sense, making yourselves one thing. And in all those activities, especially through discourse, through the whole thing, you're feeling out, okay, as we're combining into one thing, are we a better thing than either of us would be by ourselves, right? Do we combine into a greater thing? And that's where I think the instinct comes in, because an attraction comes in. Because when you're, part of it's attraction, but then there's an instinct of like, yeah, I am now a greater thing than when I'm alone, when I'm with this person. And so, that's the incredible thing about marriage and whatnot, is that both people can feel like they become something greater when they're combined with that other person. So that would be like the fundamental thing I would look for in or I think we both
Yeah.
looked for and both felt from the beginning that we both had a desire. Like I had explicit desires. I have there journaled before I met Sarah of like,
Yeah.
I want the next thing. I want to be greater. I want, more out of life. And lo and behold, Sarah appears right there, right? So that's one thing. And then the second thing that I think was key is to find somebody who again looks to something higher than themselves, like has a vision, is the way I'd put it,
Yeah.
right? Who has something that they realize that they are not the highest thing in the world, right? There is something that they look to that is higher and beyond them, a greater vision and value system beyond them. And then you come and you say, oh yeah, we could both, I like that higher vision they have. We can both look to that. And as we look to that and draw near to it, we both draw near. It's like the bases, you're the bases of a triangle. You've got the higher point above you, and that you guys can combine there. And as you grow towards that thing, you actually become, closer together as well, right? And so those are the kind of main underlying principles. I would look at it. So much just clarify, right? Especially in terms of what even sex is, and you're combining yourself into a greater being. And so that's where we've gotten into, some other, when we were talking about manhood and promiscuity and stuff, that's what cuts through. Like, do you really want to combine with a person when you combine and become something lesser by combining with the person? And if you just ask that question, it takes out so many possibilities and leaves you just with the good ones.
Yeah, and if there was ever anybody, like, to bring it more superficially back, like if there was ever someone that did ask me out, it was just obvious didn't share same values, or that we just weren't even like living on the same planet. It was easy to be like, no, that's okay. But overall, after a first date, you can already start to sense that from someone, which is why sometimes I went out on second and third and fourth dates with people.
And you go and you test it out and you combine in greater ways. That's where holding hands is a great way to start.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you think it's all right, then you kiss them eventually, and that kiss is much more of a potent union, and you're testing it out, right?
But like, if you hold off on that, like, because I didn't hold a lot of other guys' hands while you were gone. I didn't kiss anybody else.
It took us months.
A kiss means I love you in my mind.
Yeah.
So it took us a year to kiss.
I see kiss as a serious business.
Yeah, and but all along the way, it was still so. This sounds wrong. Sorry, kids, you have to hear this, but it was still so sexually exciting. Yeah. Because just having Gary grab my hand, it was just like, wow, that was amazing. And, especially after we had to maybe work something out, or we had a little conflict come up or whatever, be like, wow, we're still kind of here together working out this relationship. And it was really exciting. There were so few other people that I ever met that I got to a point where it was still fun to work things out with. Some of those other relationships, you've been in them, they're just exhausting, because you're like, we're just not even operating on the same, we don't even really want the same things exactly.
Yeah, maybe just one last thought on that is, when you add that physical side, like holding somebody's hand, the reason why it should be so sexual, if it's done right, is that it should be a triumph, in the sense that, I don't think you should probably hold somebody's hand, wondering if you're a good match for that person. You should already have a strong sense, yes, we are a good match. We do combine into something else. So then when you do combine with that person with something so intimate as the touching of hands, which is, bound up with all sorts of powerful feelings, then it should be a triumphal thing, because you're like, yes, I am combining into a new being with this person. And it's great that you have those kind of testing markers that should then ultimately lead to the consummation of your sexual union, which is how it all worked, right? With traditional marriage in the way it was supposed to be. That very night you're supposed to consummate the marriage through the actual sexual act. The full intercourse act. And that was crucial that it be done, because it was the culmination of this whole process of turning two people into one person, right? Or one being. So Anyway, this is powerful
I can
stuff.
actually go on this because now you got me thinking about all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But I just think it's sad. Last thing that I promise I'll stop
Yeah,
is I
and
just
this
think
is
it's
a good
sad.
stopping point, too.
I just think it's really sad how our society, like, I know you mentioned before, well, like I was talking to a girl that lived locally, and she was saying that she didn't feel comfortable even going on alone with a guy on a date, because so many guys have this idea that if they're on a date, that means pretty much, oh, we can have sex. Mm-hmm. And it's like, what? Like, you missed all of the fun stuff, and kind of like all your good playing cards have just been all out, and now you don't really have anything to deal. It's
crazy what we've done as a society to this whole to the potency.
It's so much more fun to do it the other way. And I think that's one way you could tell if a guy was a good one to go out with or not, if you could even be able to explain that to him and he'd be able to understand it all. Because I think people know. Mm-hmm. I think people know, or could know. Something could spark a familiarity of that's a good way to live. But anyway.
Okay, well, this is a good place to end, as far as, we got ourselves all the way to this point. In the future, I think what we still...
too long.
All our live streams go too long. We'll get better in the future about being, tighter and more concise. But I think in the future when Sara comes on, it would be good to have her, we'll dig into, like, just typical processes and days for her actually here on the farmstead, what that's like for the more feminine side of MissionTop. So thank you for being with us today.
Wasn't that what this was supposed to be about?
No, I tried to make it. This was, leaving the city for the country. We at least got to that point.
And I just have to say one more time, like, I don't feel like I did a good job explaining it, like, all the way, just because the feelings are still so raw and fresh and just still in the works.
We're in the process still.
Like, nothing's done. We can't even really tell the story because we haven't even been here a year.
Right.
So,
in a very real sense, this goes to the nature of being a being or a person. Like, we think of ourselves as contained in these bodies, but really we're extended out into we still have part of us extended out into the city where we used to live. And in terms of our associations, people's memories, the impact that you have, there's all these ways that you're extended out into the world. And so, this is still a process of us actually transitioning to this place as ourselves, as beings, and then questioning all the way, was this the right thing, etc.
Because there's days still that we're like, whoa, was this right? This is a lot of work we've gotten ourselves into and changed our life so much, and especially changed our kids' life so much, and we don't take that lightly. We know that's a big deal. Yeah. And
we could be messing them all up.
Yeah.
So with that, we'll end, and we'll explore those other things in the future. Thanks for being with us on here today, and we'll be back next week. So this is Gary and Sara signing off from MissionTop. We'll see you later.